All right, here's what's actually happening right now. Foreign investors have bought a record amount of Canadian federal bonds. Canada posted its strongest trade surplus in 4 years. A nine-nation defense bank is being headquartered in Canada. Germany signed the biggest military deal in Canadian history. Turkey opened free trade talks. Saudi Arabia signed 13 commercial agreements in a single visit. Wow.
And here's the key word in all of that: chose. None of these countries were obligated to pick Canada. They looked around at the options available to them, and they picked Canada.
And the reason, it's not complicated, right? Well, Washington has spent the last 2 years treating every alliance like a renegotiation and every partner like a cost center. The world has been quietly asking a completely different question. Who can we actually count on?
Well, increasingly, the answer is Canada. And there's a reason for that. And what is it, Dave?
Well, let's start with the bond market, because bond markets, they don't give out favors. In April, foreign investors purchased a record amount of Canadian federal bonds. We're talking global pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, major banks, all designed to lend money to Canada at scale.
Yeah, a bond is an IOU. Canada borrows money, the investors get paid interest. When demand is strong, Canada's borrowing terms improve. So why is this important? Because Canada is trying to finance ports, power lines, defense, production, housing, and transit corridors right now. Lower borrowing pressure makes all of that easier to fund.
But the bigger signal here is confidence. You don't buy record amounts of a country's debt because you think it's in trouble. You do it because you see a government that can still function, honor its commitments, and will be around for 20 years.
Now, contrast that with the United States, and it is unavoidable. Washington has been treating its own debt ceiling like a game of chicken for years. And Canada's bond demand, well, we just hit a record. The money managers noticed, and they're making moves.
And then the trade numbers came in. Canada posted a trade surplus of $4.24 billion in May, the strongest in 4 years. Exports rose for the fourth consecutive month, including strong numbers in the U.S.
Which is particularly satisfying given how many months we spent hearing that Canada has no leverage, no options, and apparently no economic future outside of whatever Washington was willing to allow. Well, guess what? The numbers are in, and they disagree. Bigly.
Yep. Now, surplus means that Canada sold more to the world than it bought. Energy, metals, food, technology. The country is producing things that people want to pay for. And it tells you something about Carney's direction here. He's not trying to sever the relationship with the United States overnight, but it's a perfect example. If one customer keeps threatening your business every 3 months, what do? You find other customers. And that's exactly what Prime Minister Carney is doing, and doing it fast.
And that brings us to Turkey. At the NATO summit in Ankara, Canada and Turkey formally launched free trade negotiations. It's another one for the win column.
Yeah, and Turkey is just not another country on the list, right? It sits at the intersection of Europe, the Middle East, the Black Sea, and Central Asia simultaneously. So when Canada opens up a trade corridor with them, it's really talking about access. That's the benefit here. To manufacturing networks, energy corridors, and markets that avoid the U.S. at all costs.
A free trade agreement clears the friction. It gives us clearer rules, faster access, more predictable conditions for Canadian businesses operating in that region. And there's a real commercial opportunity for Canada in sectors where Turkey is expanding fast.
But the big win here is that Turkey has relationships with Central Asia, the Middle East, the Balkans, and Europe all at once. Building a formal trade relationship there is not something that will pay off fast. It takes years to show up in GDP numbers, but it's the direction here that matters.
The Americans used to be the country that built these relationships everywhere. Free trade deals across South America, Southeast Asia, Europe, the Middle East. They shaped the terms of global commerce for decades. Well, Canada is now filling that space. Not by being the United States, but by being the country the United States is no longer willing to be.
Boring is underrated. We've said that 1,000 times. When the world gets chaotic, stable starts looking like a luxury product though, right? And right now, Canada is the stable option.
Now, here's where the picture gets even bigger and continues on the trajectory that we're highlighting here. 9 countries announced their intention to establish a Defense, Security, and Resilience Bank at the NATO summit. Canada, Albania, Belgium, Greece, Latvia, Luxembourg, Romania, Turkey, and Ukraine. It's expected to be headquartered in Canada.
And the core idea is this. Allied countries need to build more defense capacity, but the companies that actually make the systems, software, parts, and equipment, they need long-term financing to scale up fast enough. This bank provides that capital at a lower cost. It is basically industrial infrastructure for the next security economy.
And Canada is leading it. Canadian institutions, Canadian policy, expertise, and Canadian capital markets positioned at the center of how NATO allies finance their own security build-out. That is a huge seat at the table.
And for Canadians, this is the shift. Defense is now becoming an industry that Canada can focus on. If allied countries are going to spend over $1 trillion upgrading their security capabilities over the next decade, well, Canada can either be a buyer just standing in line like everybody else, or a builder with a seat at the table. And Prime Minister Carney is choosing to be the builder.
And this reinforces the bond numbers, the trade surplus, and the Turkey talks. They are all part of the same repositioning. Canada is moving from a country that manages its relationship with America to a country that shapes its own alliances.
Which, look, that's what's really important here. Canada has been deferential to Washington for 70 years. Not out of weakness, but out of habit, geography, and economics. It just worked. Now, we're seeing that this habit, it's breaking now. And the world is meeting Canada halfway.
And then came this submarine announcement. Canada selected Germany's marine system as the preferred supplier for up to 12 new submarines, the biggest defense procurement in Canadian history.
These are long-range, cold-water-capable submarines designed for exactly the environment that Canada operates in. The North Atlantic, the Arctic, extended deep-water patrols. Germany and Norway already use this platform, which means Canada is stepping into an established NATO ecosystem rather than starting from scratch.
And that interoperability is the point. It means Canadian submarines, training, spare parts, and operational systems work alongside our NATO allies rather than in isolation. If Canada is operating in the Arctic alongside Germany and Norway, the equipment speaks the same language.
Yeah, these submarines are a statement that Canada is serious about knowing what is happening in its own north. Not just talking about Arctic sovereignty, but actually being there and doing something about it.
And deepening the defense relationship with Germany is a signal in itself. Germany is Europe's largest economy, and it's the most significant defense spender right now. So Canada and Germany working together under the ocean, that's a piece of a larger NATO realignment happening right now in real time.
And then there was Carney's visit to Saudi Arabia, which produced 13 commercial agreements and memorandums of understanding worth more than $1 billion, covering health, technology, mining, infrastructure, and defense. That is a serious package, people.
Now, Saudi Arabia didn't do this out of the kindness of their heart. It's because they need things that Canada has, like minerals, expertise, clean tech, and infrastructure capability.
Saudi Arabia has historically gone to the US or the British for these kinds of deals. The fact that they're now signing commercial agreements with Canada tells you something about where global trust is sitting right now. Canada is getting access to a table it simply was not at 5 years ago.
And that fits the entire larger pattern. Turkey, Germany, Saudi Arabia, 9 NATO members backing a Canadian-led bank, foreign investors moving into Canadian bonds at record levels. They reflect a shared calculation that Canada is a reliable partner in a world that is running seriously short of reliable people.
So let's look at the trend here. Record bond investment, 4-year trade surplus high, free trade talks with Turkey, a multinational defense bank led by Canada, the biggest military procurement in history, and 13 commercial deals from Saudi Arabia. Each of these is real money, real contracts, and more importantly, real commitment.
So the old stigma about Canada that we're too small, too dependent, too attached to Washington to operate on our own terms, that's simply not true. Canada is now the shining example of a partner that is functional, stable, and serious.
And on those three things, Canada is actually delivering. There's no question here. Canada is at the beginning of a permanent realignment, and the world likes what it sees.
So, Alberta, are you listening? You might want to stay with us.
So here's our question for you today. Do you think that Canada takes the lead and continues on this trajectory?
And which of these moves, the submarines, the defense bank, or the trade diversification, do you think has the most long-term impact for Canada?
Let us know in the comments below because we love hearing how you weigh in on all of these things.
And if you want to stay ahead of all of this, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't already and turn on notifications. We are tracking every move.
And don't forget to like, hype, and share as well because other people need to hear about Canada's success.
Check out the pinned comment for all the fun stuff to our merch and our Substack and private Facebook group while you're at it.
Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Ciao for now.